Hello everybody, I'm Nikolai Foster, the Artistic Director here at Curve Theatre in Leicester and Director of this brand new production of Billy Elliot, which will be on our stage over the summer. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the design process and how we make a production like Billy Elliot and how we get to the finished product and you hopefully all coming to see the show on our stage. So the design process for this production will have started about a year ago. To begin with, myself as the director and the producers and the team here at Curve, we go about assembling a production team to realise and make the production together. So that would include roles like a designer, a choreographer, sound designer, lighting designer, casting director, musical supervisor, musical director. And I guess as the director, my job is to think about the overall vision and the overall direction that the production and the play is going to head towards, and how all of those different departments, all of those different teams come together to help realise that vision, that sort of central idea. And then of course, once you have the designer, the costume designer, the choreographer, all of those teams, all of those different people come with their own ideas, their own sort of vision and concept of how they will make their piece of the jigsaw sort of fit together and come together. And what you get is this sort of great big melting pot of ideas and the sort of sense of us moving together, I guess, hopefully, in the same direction. So thinking specifically about the design, as I say, we started this process with the designer Michael Taylor about a year ago. And so our initial meetings are conversations about what the play might mean to us personally, what the play says about the world that we live in today, how it's relevant to our community, our society today, and then physically how we want it to look, how we want it to feel, how we want it to sort of manifest in the space. And there are so many different starting points. The first one being, I guess, the script. So rereading the words on the page, sort of drawing out themes in the play, drawing out clues that might be in the stage directions. Lee Hall, I think his opening stage direction is a bare stage. And I think that was a really exciting and interesting provocation for Michael and I. How brave can we be in the mighty space here at Curve? How bare, how empty can we, how empty can that space be? And what are the elements that we need to add into that space to help tell the story and to communicate the story to the audience and to create the right atmosphere for the play to be released in. And I suppose one of the really interesting things that we learned during the pandemic and some of the work we've done coming out of the pandemic is just how blessed we are with our space here at Curve and how malleable and how much we can do with the resource which is inherent and just, part of the fabric of our organisation. And Billy Elliot, as I'm sure you're aware, is set during the miners' strike of the mid-80s. And obviously the mining communities and life in the pit is really important to our story and to the world of this play. And for those of you who know the space at Curve, I'm sure you know it's a very contemporary theatre space. There's lots of metal shutters. We have a fully automated flying system where lighting bars and pieces of metalwork can fly in and out of the space. The walls of the theatre can fly up. So it's a very heavy, industrial metal space. And we felt it was really important to celebrate the space and use it as part of the design and the architecture of our production, and really learning how much of our natural space we can sort of use for free, really, within the production. And as I say, coming out of the pandemic, doing plays like Sunset Boulevard, A Chorus Line, which really celebrated the architecture of our building, Billy Elliot feels like the next sort of step in that journey to really using the full technical resources that we've got here in the theatre. So yeah, going back to the script, it's at a bare stage, and so we're thinking about our industrial, metal, heavy space. What do we need to add to that to tell this story? So as I say, the starting point was very much the script, but then from there we started our research. So reading books about the miners' strike, reading books and looking at resources and online articles about the history of mining in this country. And one of the things we were able to do was visit the National Coal Mining Museum up in Wakefield. And it's an incredible sort of living museum where you get to really get a sense of how these pit villages and colliery towns were founded, because, you know, in Billy Elliot, the village of Easington was built around the existence of the pit, and that story is replicated in pits and colliery villages right across the north, and indeed around us here in Leicestershire. I live just outside Colville, which, as the title suggests, is a town which was founded on the basis of the coal mining history. So we had a great day at the National Coal Mining Museum, absorbing the architecture and imagining what life would have been like in a colliery village. And what was really interesting about that day, sort of thinking about the design, was some of these incredible colours that are very sort of reminiscent of the 1980s, but were very much sort of part of the architecture and the equipment that you see around the coal mines. So I think, you think of a colliery, you think of black, you think of coal, you think of dirt, you think of the sort of more darker colours and how they might work within the design. But what was really interesting and really helpful about certainly this visit is that you start to see all of these sort of 80s, what I call acid colours, greens, oranges, yellows, blues. And you'll see later when we get into the model how we've carried that idea through into the design. But going to the mining museum was incredibly helpful. And then from there, we later went on to visit Easington itself. And we spent a couple of days meeting with Brian Jolly, who is an ex-miner and now represents a heritage group who take people on tours of Easington and share the history of the miners, their lives, and of course the strike of 84, 85. And we were really privileged and humbled to meet with miners, their wives, their families, union leaders, and really hear about the mine and the strike and the people on whom Billy Elliot really is based. And we were really inspired to literally go around the streets and see the architecture and the world that was part of the landscape of Billy and his dad Jackie and brother Tony and grandma, and imagine the sort of streets and places that these characters, albeit fictional, would have roamed and lived in and seen every day. And I think what was really instructive about visiting Easington, bearing in mind we've got this idea of a bare stage, we've got this notion of our architecture at Curve, we've seen the architecture of the pit life up in Wakefield, and then seeing Easington, we were faced with the reality of what that town and what the mine and what it all looked like. And I think myself and Michael, the designer, and Lucy, the choreographer, felt really strongly coming away from Easington that our design should not try to recreate or replicate the real streets of Easington. It felt like it was reductive and it wasn't serving the memory and stories of the real people of Easington and also the fictional world of the play by merely being lazy as a production team and taking the real things that you see in the streets and putting them on stage. It felt like if our production is going to work, then we needed to find an imaginative, a poetic landscape, an abstract world which could honour these lives and stories and do it in a theatrical way. And of course the film shows you those real streets and that real world in a way that only film can. And it felt like our job as theatre makers, storytellers on stage, to do it in a really imaginative and bold way, which honours Lee Hall's opening stage direction of an empty stage. And also the play ostensibly is about a young person and young people navigating their way through the strike, through life, and how might they see this world? How might the pit and the streets of Easington and all of these things look like in Billy's imagination through a child's eyes? So we knew we had to find abstract gesture to communicate this story. And as we made our way down to this site of the old coal field, Easington Colliery doesn't exist anymore. It's now a beautiful nature reserve where, on the day we went, it was a gorgeous sunny day and, people are walking their dogs and there is barely any, sense that there was a pit there. We literally turned the corner and on the top of the hill, we saw this magnificent steel structure, which of course was, we learnt, one of the lift shafts from the old Easington Colliery. And the minute we saw this, it's now a piece of sort of art, a sculpture. The minute we saw this memorial standing proud on the hillside overlooking the cold North Sea and the blazing spring sunshine, we knew that this would be our sort of key into the play, and that within our empty curved stage with all of our wonderful architecture of our theatre, that this could be a great gesture to honour the community that we're representing and the story that we're telling, but also create this sort of abstract piece of architecture in our space which could move and could, in some senses be the Elliot family household, could maybe be Billy's bedroom, and could maybe be other locations within the play. So suddenly that unlocked the world of the design for us. And so once we'd done all of our research and once we'd sort of, as a team, said, yes, this is the direction we're going in, we then start to work with a model box. And so what you can see here is Michael Taylor's design, his model box for the play. And what we do is we work in the scale of 1 to 25, so that everything you see beyond this front steel shutter here, which I'll show you in a moment, is all 25 times smaller. So I always think of it like that scene in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory where Mike TV gets shrunk down in size. So all of the objects that you'll see in the design are all, there's a piano for Mr. Braithwaite, a little fridge for the Elliot household. These are all 25 times smaller than they are in real life. And it means that Michael and myself and the lighting designer can work in a manageable sort of fashion, try out ideas, try out different objects in the space and see how it works without obviously building, the great big set and realizing something doesn't work or it's wrong. So as I say, that whole process of research and creating and imagining what our world of the play might be started about a year ago. And then the beginning of this year, January time, Michael and myself started meeting. Originally, we had what's called a white card version of the model. So I'll show you a little image of that. So before we dive into a full colour version of the model, you have, as I say, what's called a white card version. So here you can see in the design 2 towers, the north and south tower, which was sort of recreation of the lift shaft that we saw in Easington. And so everything's in white card, and basically Michael's experimenting, cutting out different bits of card, trying different ideas and seeing how it works and feels within the space. So before we get into the full colour version, which I'm showing you now, we spent weeks and weeks having a meeting, Michael going away, trying something else out, coming back, showing, talking through it, with this idea of a white card model. And it basically is what it says on the tin. It's a load of white card, a load of getting your fingers cut, chopping up bits of cardboard and gluing bits together. But it's a really amazing part of the process as a director and as the designer, playing and dreaming and imagining what the production could be. It's a very sort of fulfilling part of the design. So we move now into the model box, and this is sort of where we've ended up with our production. So hopefully you'll come and see the show and you'll see everything that's in this model box, but 25 times bigger. So our play opens with a bit of background to the story, to the miners' strike, a bit of history, and that will all happen in front of this huge steel shutter, which now is just a piece of black cardboard, but 25 times bigger downstairs. It's several tons worth of steel shutter. And at the beginning of the play, our young people will put their fingers as if under the shutter, and it will look like they are opening it up. And what they will reveal to the audience is this huge cavernous space. And these sort of opening images of the play are these sort of vignettes of miners underground mining the earth, and these solitary lives underground, these sort of little sort of glimmers of light as we pick out these miners. And you really won't see much else other than that. And I suppose the challenge as a director that you have working on a model like this is imagining everything else. So imagining how the lights and how the soundscape and how choreographically everything will move within this space, because at the moment it's a great big open cavernous space. But for example, I know in my imagination that there'll be a tiny little glimmer of light over, say, we've got a miner here, and that's all the audience will see. They won't be seeing this huge sort of empty space. And what you can see in this empty space is a huge floor. And Michael again has taken his sort of inspiration from the coal field, from the black, shiny, almost sort of beautiful, iridescent quality of coal. So the paintwork here, the phenomenal detail of inky blues, almost bits of silver, browns of the earth, that has all gone into the paintwork on the floor. You can't quite see, I guess, from where you are, but you see in a second, there are 8 sort of grills on the floor where light and smoke will come up from the depths of the earth down below. Over here we have a little sort of cubby hole for Billy. That's sort of Billy's little sort of hideout where he can go and hide, and all of his memorabilia and box of sort of memories from his mum will be saved and safe, if you like. We have these huge fences, and if you remember at the National Coal Mining Museum, I talked about those 80s acid colours. And so in this very dark, oily, black, coaly world of our play, with all of our metal and our sort of industry of curve, along with the costumes, we're going to introduce these huge splashes of colour. So these vivid sort of acid yellow of these fences, which will be manipulated by the actors to create different locations within the space. So you can see, literally we had the fences on the side, they're sort of, they are real fences in a sort of exterior space. And then by bringing them into this configuration, we feel like we're more in an interior space. And then the lighting designer, Ben Cracknell, will fly in several bars of lights above this area, which will draw the huge cavernous space in and make it something much more interior, much more small scale. And then, for example, one of the early scenes of the play takes place in a community hall where the lads are doing their boxing. And so what we do here is we have a lift in the centre of the floor. So this represents our lift, and that will lift out of the middle of the floor to create a sort of boxing ring sort of feeling. We will have 4 of our young company standing in the corners with a bit of bungee cord, a bit of elastic cord stretched around them. And then with a bit of imagination, a bit of clever lighting, we in a sense create our own boxing ring. And with the lighting rig above, we've created that sort of first iconic scene in the boxing gym. And then very easily, the kids strike the bungee cord, the lift goes back down, and then we bring on, one moment callers, we bring on a couple of ballet bars, and then we've transformed the space into Mrs. Wilkinson's dance class. And we're with the ballet girls and meeting Billy Elliot for the first time in a ballet scenario. So very effectively, in a very sort of filmic way, we're able to transform the space and make it into something very different. But remembering the extraordinary structure that we first saw on the hill in Easington, this is a verbatim 1 to 25 times smaller model of that incredible lift shaft that we saw on the hill in Easington. And you can see why, as a director, with a play that has a scene set in a living room and in the privacy of Billy's bedroom, and there's a scene set in the toilets at the community hall, this for me immediately made sense within the production, that we could have Billy's Billy's kitchen down here, the bedroom, and then the toilet scene up there. And then you can see all of the phenomenal detail which we first saw on the structure in Easington is now recreated in this model. And then the only thing we've added on to it, which the audience will never really see, is that Michael has had to really work out the logistics of how many steps we need and the actual physics of how we get actors safely up and down this structure. And then the wonderful sort of lift doors that the miners would have used at the back there, they can be flung open by the actors to create sort of dynamic entrances into these scenes. And what this piece will do, its sort of home base, if you like, is upstage, so at the back of the stage here. And then when this piece of scenery is required, it will truck forward, as you can see here, to a more downstage position, so it's closer to the audience, and the actors are sort of nice and close to play those scenes. And then we can easily spill out of the sort of kitchen scene into the main body of the space. And again, as a director, I do a storyboard where I sort of narrate every scene for the production team, so everybody's sort of on the same page. But I know in my imagination that with a bit of lighting just sort of on this central area, then we're containing that scene. And when we're in those sort of very intimate interior scenes, we're able to really isolate it, and the audience, the actor, and the writing can all be really focused. And then, for example, later on in the play, we go to a riot scene, and suddenly we can be in this vast open space. We can use our, fences in other dynamic ways, which sort of give you a sense of a sort of police cordon, maybe on, the picket line outside of the mine, and you sort of get that sort of world there. We also have a couple of flown elements which we can use during the course of the show. So these represent towers of lights. These are still at white card stage, but you can see Ben, the lighting designer here, has imagined that these are literally hundreds of parkan lights which will fly into the space for the riot scenes and Billy's angry dance. And again, when this is sort of 25 times bigger and you've got these huge sort of, sort of giant sort of pieces of lighting flying in, when you sort of see them up against the scale of an actor, they should be very dominating and really, when you think about epic theatre and sort of creating big, bold operatic pictures, I guess that's what our design allows us to do, sort of going from the sort of granular detail and intimacy of Billy's home to then something which is much more epic and really unashamedly theatrical. And then we have other flown elements. For example, we have the Easington Lodge, County Durham area flag banner, which was sort of very iconic from that time. Again, it's introducing splashes of colour along with Ed's fantastic costumes into this space. And then just to sort of finish off, again, how exciting to be able to sort of lift this out, but this structure which you've seen upstage left in the space is a huge scaffolding structure. The band will all be on top here. The reason we wanted to put the band up high was that if you imagine a Billy or a Michael or one of the Debbies or any of the kids, in fact, these tiny little figures in front of this, I didn't want anything upstage of them that might distract or pull focus from the young people. And there was something really exciting about the band being sort of towering above and dominating the space. And then we have a middle walkway here where the actors we can use it as an interesting space. And then you can see some of the wires here, which again, when we went to the pit in Wakefield, you just saw sort of reams and reams of wires and bits of architecture and sort of gnarly wires. The sort of history of coal mining seems to be in this country that things were just added and added and added. There was no sort of like prototype, perfect one size fits all when pits were being designed. So you really do get a sense that things were added, and you just sort of see all of these wires and bits of really fascinating architecture, which when you're sort of playing with a design like this, all of that sort of gnarly texture and detail is really exciting when it's then lit. And at various points, during the production, we'll be lifting out the side walls of the theatre to create the riot aesthetic with police and miners streaming in from the foyer outside. But it's a mixture of sort of imagined design, but then taking, as I say, the architecture of our theatre and using it in really bold and innovative ways and sort of bringing those two things together. So thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy the show.